This is Ask Congress, the show that seeks to facilitate and expand personal relationships between the viewing public and the representatives that they place in power. And we have added to our programming. Now we program to 106 Congresses throughout the world, which is a situation that would permit you, the viewers, to contact any congressman throughout the world. It's on askcongress.net. Today we're privileged to have on our program a very distinguished woman, the Congresswoman Illeana Ros Lehtinen from Florida's 27th District.
Thank you, Lester.
She is one of the most important ladies in the Congress. And in fact, in the area of foreign relations, I guess you being a Republican in a Democratic administration, you represent the Republican Party on foreign relations.
I wouldn't go that far, not nearly that far. But thank you, Lester. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on your show, to be able to reach so many countries through askcongress.net. Did I get that right?
That's right.
Well, as you know, I was forced to flee with my family from the oppressive communist regime of Fidel Castro. So with the help of a lot of good people, I became the first Hispanic woman elected to Congress. So that's really my claim to fame, and the first Cuban American elected to Congress. And I had the privilege of chairing the Committee on Foreign Affairs for a little bit, and now I'm chairing the Subcommittee on Middle East and North Africa. And that keeps me really, really active, Lester.
I can
Everything
imagine.
that is hot and controversial is happening in our subcommittee. The turmoil in Egypt, I mean, everywhere, Libya, you name it, and it's happening in our subcommittee. And for me, being an advocate of human rights around the globe has been at least what I hope that I stand for.
Well, you've been really a leader in that connection. I would like to take Cuba first, if we could.
Thank you.
Is there any change there?
Lester, that's the magical question, and I wish that I could have an answer in the affirmative, but I can't. Because while the Castro brothers remain in power, there really is no change possible. And even once they are removed from power, because no one is immortal, Fidel Castro is aging, Raul Castro is his younger brother, but he's up there, and he does not have the vitality of a Lester Wolff, because for Lester, age is not a problem at all. But the Castro brothers have built in an infrastructure to get them to remain in power, to violate human rights. You know, just every Sunday, a group of courageous women called Las Damas de Blanco, the ladies in white, they dress in white, they hold the portraits of a loved one who has been or is presently incarcerated for human rights violations according to the regime in jail, and they march from their homes. Really, they peacefully walk from their homes to Catholic Mass every Sunday. Well, just last Sunday, there were 135 arrests of these peaceful dissidents. So, Lester, they have a network of intimidation, of fear, of harassment, of persecution, and that takes a long time to get rid of.
But it seems to be glossed over in the press, and nobody talks about it.
That is genius. You hit the nail on the head when you say it's glossed over in the press. Let me tell you what happens. If you had a show like this, of course you wouldn't be able to, because I don't know what you're going to ask me. You don't know what I'm going to say.
Right.
That would not be allowed in communist Cuba. But suppose that happened and you asked me about human rights abuses in Cuba, you would no longer have the show. So if you're an accredited journalist, let's say AP, CNN, any of those outlets, and you have a press bureau in Cuba, which is of great prestige, I don't know why, and you report on human rights abuses, you will get that card punched out. Now, if you report on the picturesque 1950s Cadillacs and the quaint architecture of old Havana and how it's decaying, you can go ahead and report that. So what happens is that it's like North Korea. That's the perfect model to describe Cuba. People say, you know, in Egypt we see protests, in Libya we see protests. We don't, because Cuba is like North Korea. Where are the protests in North Korea? Those people would be hounded, they would be killed, they would disappear. So Cuba models itself after North Korea. They don't have internet except in the hotels. Who can afford a hotel? If you're a Cuban, you can't afford a hotel. The internet is only for the tourists, and so they have no internet, they have no Twitter, they have no Facebook. It is a closed society. Even though we have liberalized our laws to allow people to go in, the Castro brothers don't allow anything to really get to the people. In spite of that, they die to come over to the United States. I mean, literally, we have people washing ashore wanting to come to the place that they've heard all their lives are the Yankee imperialist pigs, the United States, and they love us. The Cuban people love us.
You know something very interesting? When I was here and I was chairman of the Narcotics Committee, I established a direct link between Castro and drug trafficking. And you know what happened? Castro met with a delegation from the United States and offered to fund my opponent in my next election.
I think that is so interesting and so significant. And do you know that that still continues? In fact, our own intelligence operations, and that's not Republican or Democrat administrations, all of them have said that Cuba has one of the most sophisticated intelligence operations against the United States, similar to China and similar to another rogue regime. Even though the Cuban people are hungry, literally hungry, they don't have medicine. Even though there's no embargo on food and medicine, Castro will do anything he can to influence U.S. elections and to make sure that strong advocates for democracy like Lester Wolff are defeated, and that, you know, it's a barrage of criticism against me, my colleagues, Mario Diaz-Balart and company, and we have a strong nucleus there of Cuban-American patriots. Marco Rubio, what a superstar in the Senate. Bob Menendez, chair of the International Relations Committee in the Senate. Then we have Albio Sirius, Democrat from New Jersey. Mario Diaz-Balart. We have Joe Garcia, and we have me. Even though we're not that many in the United States, we really achieved a lot. And we want to make sure that the Cuban people, that we can do what we can, however limited that is, to have the people be free.
Tell me, do you think that there is any chance of the demonstrations or what has taken place in the Middle East, where you are a preeminent figure now? Do you think there's any chance of anything like that occurring in Cuba?
No, there is no chance. My colleagues asked me, Lester, we see demonstrations in Libya. We see them in Egypt. We see them all across the Middle East and North Africa. Why don't we see them in Cuba? Because, first of all, they have no access to free information the way that Egypt has. They have no access to the internet. It is against the law in Cuba to gather in groups of more than 3. I mean, you can't have a meeting of 4 people without having the neighborhood watch committee. And this is not like Crime Watch. They're there to tattle on you and to really do you harm.
Is there an underground? Is there an underground?
There is. There is a growing underground, and it's led by courageous women like the ladies in white. And God bless them. Even though there are waves of arrest every Sunday, they make sure that people know that there's a violation of human rights occurring every day in Cuba. And like the ladies in white, who have received, by the way, international recognition for their fight in favor of freedom and democracy for Cuba, there are many groups similar to that. And the fight continues. And like as Ted Kennedy says, the dream lives on, and that dream continues in a Cuba. As enslaved as they are, the people of Cuba will be free.
Why is it that our government can be critical of other nations of the world, and here we have a nation that's on our doorstep, and nothing seems to be in the making even.
Lester, we are of like minds. What can I say? You and I, we are simpatico. We are in agreement. We talk about the need for human rights for Aung San Suu Kyi, and I agree. You know, in Burma, we need human rights in Vietnam. We need human rights in China. We need human rights in Russia. Well, we need human rights right here, 90 miles from my district, 90 miles from my shores, and yet we're so quick to say, well, you know, they must like that system. No, people tried their best to come to the United States, and let me tell you, if this little table existed in Cuba, you know, by the end of the day, this would be used as a raft to come to the United States. That's how desperate people are to leave the tyranny. Because why? Because people want to be free. Who wants to live under a totalitarian regime? Let me tell you some interesting facts about Cuba. Do you know that it is illegal and you are charged with a crime, not an arcane law like we have in our books sometimes that are never enforced. No, a real law that if you cannot travel from Havana to Cienfuegos, another town in Cuba, without permission from the government. You, as a Cuban citizen, cannot travel from one town to another without permission. You cannot move your residence from one, and it's all state-owned, from one apartment to another without permission from the government. And just recently, they made it legal to be able to sell or trade or barter your car. And they thought that was a significant change. But, you know, all of those things are superfluous when you compare them to freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, the things that we take for granted every day. To have a show like this, I don't know what you're going to ask me. You don't know what I'm going to say. As I said, you cannot, it is illegal to have a show like this in Cuba. If you give an interview to a journalist, you have to have permission from the government. That's why all the sources are anonymous.
What do you see in the future?
The people will continue to reject that authoritarian dictatorial regime, and we just need a leader to stand up and say, basta ya, enough. If we could get that leader, the people will follow, because they have seen after 50-something years of totalitarian regime, there is no future for them, and they want to be free. No one wants to live like a slave.
How does Guantanamo fit into that picture?
Great question. You're hitting that. You're on fire today. Well, Guantanamo is a naval base that the United States has the land ownership. It is sovereign territory of the United States of America. There is nothing that Castro can do. Of course, he violates all international norms, but now we've got it penetrated in such a way that he cannot take over Guantanamo without incurring the wrath of all of our armed forces personnel there. Even if we let go of all of the detainees from the international war against terrorism, even if we let go of those, Guantanamo will still be a naval base controlled and owned by the United States of America in perpetuity, forever. And even though Castro does not obey any international law, we will always have a military presence there, because we had it before the detainees of the Afghan and Iraq war, and we will have it post that, because those detainees, their cases will be heard and they will be adjudicated and they will leave.
How do you feel about the whole question of Guantanamo?
I believe that it should remain open, because suppose we were to close it, Lester. Let's suppose we change it and we close it tomorrow. Where would you put the next terrorist that we catch? We're going to have to put him somewhere, and that location will be called the New Gitmo. You can guarantee it, because we have to have a location that will not be considered technically by the courts to be under their jurisdiction, so we don't have to afford them certain rights. But you have to have a secure place, and if you put them in the mainland of the United States of America, you would have a real difficult time in securing that base and making sure that we could stop terrorists from invading it. As Donald Rumsfeld said, it is the least worst place for these detainees. And soon their cases will be heard, and justice will prevail.
What about the Russian influence? Is this still there?
It is still there. The Russian influence is still felt, but now more and more it's Venezuela that is really the sugar daddy for the Castro regime, and Castro is actually leading the charge for what Maduro, the new Chavez of Venezuela, is doing, because as a useful idiot as Chavez was, the new leader of Venezuela, illegitimately elected, Nicolas Maduro, makes Chavez look like a Shakespearean scholar in intellect, because Maduro is as dumb as this table, and really has no understanding of world affairs, was elected illegitimately, and thank goodness the United States has yet to recognize him as the leader of Venezuela, but he's there, and he is providing free oil, free gas, all of the money that the Castro brothers need to stay afloat. So the Russian influence continues in terms of an espionage network. The China influence is very pronounced in Cuba as well, but the money comes from the natural resources that Venezuela has available.
The whole situation today, you mentioned China, and I'd like to get to that in the next segment of the show, because people don't realize today the situation that exists. With all being busy in other areas of the world, China sits by and looks at those islands, and there may be greater influence that they have in moving into those islands.
I want to talk about that too.
Very good. We'll cut away for just a few moments, and then we'll be back to you right after that.
Thank you.